Bhagat Singh was an Indian socialist revolutionary whose two acts of dramatic violence against the British in India and execution at age 23 made him a folk hero of the Indian independence movement. In December 1928, Bhagat Singh and an associate, Shivram Rajguru, fatally shot a 21-year-old British police officer, John Saunders, in Lahore, British India, mistaking Saunders, who was still on probation, for the British police superintendent, James Scott, whom they had intended to assassinate. They believed Scott was responsible for the death of popular Indian nationalist leader Lala Lajpat Rai. By having ordered a lathi charge in which Rai was injured, and 2 weeks after which died of a heart attack. Saunders was felled by a single shot from Rajguru, a marksman. He was then shot several times by Singh, the post-mortem report showing 8 bullet wounds. Another associate of Singh, Chandra Shekhar Azad, shot dead an Indian police constable, Chanan Singh, who attempted to pursue Singh and Rajguru as they fled. After escaping, Singh and his associates, using pseudonyms, publicly owned to avenging Lajpat Rai's death, putting up prepared posters, which, however, they had altered to show Saunders as their intended target. Singh was thereafter on the run for many months, and no convictions resulted at the time. Surfacing again in April 1929, he and another associate, Batukeshwar Dutt, exploded 2 improvised bombs inside the Central Legislative Assembly in Delhi. They showered leaflets from the gallery on the legislators below, shouted slogans, and then allowed the authorities to arrest them. The arrest, and the resulting publicity, had the effect of bringing to light Singh's complicity in the John Saunders case. Awaiting trial, Singh gained much public sympathy after he joined fellow defendant Jatin Das in a hunger strike, demanding better prison conditions for Indian prisoners, and ending in Das's death from starvation in September 1929. Singh was convicted and hanged in March 1931, aged 23. Bhagat Singh became a popular folk hero after his death. Jawaharlal Nehru wrote about him, Bhagat Singh did not become popular because of his act of terrorism but because he seemed to vindicate, for the moment, the honor of Lala Lajpat Rai. And through him of the nation. He became a symbol, the act was forgotten, the symbol remained, and within a few months each town and village of the Punjab, and to a lesser extent in the rest of northern India, resounded with his name. In still later years, Singh, an atheist and socialist in life, won admirers in India from among a political spectrum that included both communists and right-wing Hindu nationalists. Although many of Singh's associates, as well as many Indian anti-colonial revolutionaries, were also involved in daring acts, and were either executed or died violent deaths, few came to be leonized in popular art and literature to the same extent as Singh. Bhagat Singh, a Sandhu Jat, was born in 1907 to Kishan Singh and Vidyavati at Chakno. 105 gigabytes, Banga village, Jaranwala Tehsil in the Layalpur district of the Punjab province of British India, present-day Pakistan. His birth coincided with the release of his father and 2 uncles, Ajit Singh and Swaran Singh, from jail. His family members were 6, some had been active in Indian independence movements, others had served in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's army. His ancestral village was Khatkar Kalan, near the town of Banga, India in Nawanshahar district, now renamed Shaheed Bhagat Singh Nagar, of the Punjab. His family was politically active. His grandfather, Arjun Singh, followed Swami Dayananda Saraswati's Hindu reformist movement, Arya Samaj, which had a considerable influence on Bhagat. His father and uncles were members of the Ghadar party, led by Kartar Singh Sarabha and Hardayal. Ajit Singh was forced into exile due to pending court cases against him, while Swaran Singh died at home in Lahore in 1910 following his release from jail. Unlike many Sikhs of his age, Singh did not attend the Khalsa High School in Lahore. His grandfather did not approve of the school officials' loyalty to the British government. He was enrolled instead in the Dayanand Anglo-Vedic High School, an Arya Samaji institution. In 1919, when he was 12 years old, Singh visited the site of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre hours after thousands of unarmed people gathered at a public meeting had been killed. When he was 14 years old, he was among those in his village who welcomed protesters against the killing of a large number of unarmed people at Gurudwara Nankana Sahib on the 20th of February 1921. Singh became disillusioned with Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of non-violence after he called off the non-cooperation movement. Gandhi's decision followed the violent murders of policemen by villagers who were reacting to the police killing 3 villagers in the 1922 Chauri Chura incident. Singh joined the young revolutionary movement and began to advocate for the violent overthrow of the British government in India. In 1923, Singh joined the National College in Lahore, where he also participated in extracurricular activities like the Dramatics Society. In 1923, he won an essay competition set by the Punjab Hindi Sahitya Sammelan, writing on the problems in the Punjab. Inspired by the Young Italy movement of Giuseppe Mazzini, he founded the Indian socialist youth organization Naujawan Bharat Sabha in March 1926. He also joined the Hindustan Republican Association, which had prominent leaders, such as Chandrasekhar Azad, Ram Prasad Bismil and Shahid Ashfaq Khan. A year later, to avoid an arranged marriage, Singh ran away to Kanpur. Police became concerned with Singh's influence on youths and arrested him in May 1927 on the pretext that he had been involved in a bombing that had taken place in Lahore in October 1926. He was released on a surety of Rs. 60,000 5 weeks after his arrest. He wrote for and edited Urdu and Punjabi newspapers published in Amritsar and also contributed to low-priced pamphlets published by the Naujawan Bharat Sabha that excoriated the British. He also wrote for Kirti, the journal of the Kirti Kisan Party, and briefly for the Veer Arjun newspaper, published in Delhi. He often used pseudonyms, including names such as Balwant, Ranjit and Vidrohi. In 1928, the British government set up the Simon Commission to report on the political situation in India. Some Indian political parties boycotted the commission because there were no Indians in its membership and there were protests across the country. When the commission visited Lahore on the 30th of October 1928, Lala Lajpat Rai led a march in protest against it. Police attempts to disperse the large crowd resulted in violence. The Superintendent of Police, James A. Scott, ordered the police to lathi charge the protesters and personally assaulted Rai, who was injured. Rai died of a heart attack on the 17th of November 1928. Doctors thought that his death might have been hastened by the injuries he had received. When the matter was raised in the Parliament of the United Kingdom, the British government denied any role in Rai's death. Bhagat was a prominent member of the HRA and was probably responsible, in large part, for its change of name to HSRA in 1928. The HSRA vowed to avenge Rai's death. Singh conspired with revolutionaries like Shivram Rajguru, Sukhdev Thapar, and Chandrasekhar Azad to kill Scott. However, in a case of mistaken identity, the plotters shot John P. Saunders, an assistant superintendent of police, as he was leaving the district police headquarters in Lahore on the 17th of December 1928. After killing Saunders, the group escaped through the DAV college entrance, across the road from the district police headquarters. Chanan Singh, a head constable who was chasing them, was fatally injured by Chandrasekhar Azad's covering fire. They then fled on bicycles to pre-arranged safe houses. The police launched a massive search operation to catch them, blocking all entrances and exits to and from the city. The CID kept a watch on all young men leaving Lahore. The fugitives hid for the next 2 days. On the 19th of December 1928, Sukhdev called on Durgavati Devi, sometimes known as Durga Bhabhi, wife of another HSRA member, Bhagwati Charan Vora, for help, which she agreed to provide. They decided to catch the train departing from Lahore to Bathinda en route to Howrah, Calcutta, early the next morning. Singh and Rajguru, both carrying loaded revolvers, left the house early the next day. Dressed in Western attire, Bhagat Singh cut his hair, shaved his beard and wore a hat over cropped hair, and carrying Devi's sleeping child, Singh and Devi passed as a young couple, while Rajguru carried their luggage as their servant. At the station, Singh managed to conceal his identity while buying tickets, and the three boarded the train heading to Kanpur, now Kanpur. There they boarded a train for Lucknow since the CID at Howrah railway station usually scrutinized passengers on the direct train from Lahore. At Lucknow, Rajguru left separately for Banaras while Singh, Devi and the infant went to Howrah, with all except Singh returning to Lahore a few days later. For some time, Singh had been exploiting the power of drama as a means to inspire the revolt against the British, purchasing a magic lantern to show slides that enlivened his talks about revolutionaries such as Ram Prasad Bismil, who had died as a result of the Kakori conspiracy. In 1929, he proposed a dramatic act to the HSRA intended to gain massive publicity for their aims. Influenced by Auguste Vaillant, a French anarchist who had bombed the Chamber of Deputies in Paris, Singh's plan was to explode a bomb inside the Central Legislative Assembly. The nominal intention was to protest against the Public Safety Bill and the Trade Dispute Act, which had been rejected by T. He assembly but were being enacted by the Viceroy using his special powers. The actual intention was for the perpetrators to allow themselves to be arrested so that they could use court appearances as a stage to publicize their cause. The HSRA leadership was initially opposed to Bhagat's participation in the bombing because they were certain that his prior involvement in the Saunders shooting meant that his arrest would ultimately result in his execution. However, they eventually decided that he was their most suitable candidate. On the 8th of April 1929, Singh, accompanied by Batukeshwar Dutt, threw 2 bombs into the assembly chamber from its public gallery while it was in session. The bombs had been designed not to kill, but some members, including George Ernest Schuster, the finance member of the Viceroy's Executive Council, were injured. The smoke from the bombs filled the assembly so that Singh and Dutt could probably have escaped in the confusion had they wished. Instead, they stayed shouting the slogan, Inqilab Zindabad. Long live the revolution, and threw leaflets. The 2 men were arrested and subsequently moved through a series of jails in Delhi. The trial began in the first week of June, following a preliminary hearing in May. On the 12th of June, both men were sentenced to life imprisonment for causing explosions of a nature likely to endanger life, unlawfully and maliciously. Dutt had been defended by Asaf Ali, while Singh defended himself. Doubts have been raised about the accuracy of testimony offered at the trial. One key discrepancy concerns the automatic pistol that Singh had been carrying when he was arrested. Some witnesses said that he had fired 2 or 3 shots while the police sergeant who arrested him testified that the gun was pointed downward when he took it from him and that Singh was playing with it. According to an article in the India Law Journal, the prosecution witnesses were coached, their accounts were incorrect, and Singh had turned over the pistol himself. Singh was given a life sentence. In 1929, the HSRA had set up bomb factories in Lahore and Saharanpur. On the 15th of April 1929, the Lahore bomb factory was discovered by the police, leading to the arrest of other members of HSRA, including Sukhdev Kishori Lal and Jayagopal. Not long after this, the Saharanpur factory was also raided and some of the conspirators became informants. With the new information available, the police were able to connect the 3 strands of the Saunders murder, assembly bombing, and bomb manufacture. Singh, Sukhdev, Rajguru, and 21 others were charged with the Saunders murder. Singh was re-arrested for murdering Saunders and Chanan Singh based on substantial evidence against him, including statements by his associates, Hansraj Vora and Jayagopal. His life sentence in the assembly bomb case was deferred until the Saunders case was decided. He was sent to Central Jail Miawali from the Delhi jail. There he witnessed discrimination between European and Indian prisoners. He considered himself, along with others, to be a political prisoner. He noted that he had received an enhanced diet at Delhi which was not being provided at Miawali. He led other Indian, self-identified political prisoners he felt were being treated as common criminals in a hunger strike. They demanded equality in food standards, clothing, toiletries, and other hygienic necessities, as well as access to books and a daily newspaper. They argued that they should not be forced to do manual labor or any undignified work in the jail. The hunger strike inspired a rise in public support for Singh and his colleagues from around June 1929. The Tribune newspaper was particularly prominent in this movement and reported on mass meetings in places such as Lahore and Amritsar. The government had to apply Section 144 of the Criminal Code in an attempt to limit gatherings. The government tried to break the strike by placing different food items in the prison cells to test the prisoners' resolve. Water pitchers were filled with milk so that either the prisoners remained thirsty or broke their strike. Nobody faltered and the impasse continued. The authorities then attempted force-feeding the prisoners, but this was resisted. With the matter still unresolved, the Indian Viceroy, Lord Irwin, cut short his vacation in Simla to discuss the situation with jail authorities. Since the activities of the hunger strikers had gained popularity and attention amongst the people nationwide, the government decided to advance the start of the Saunders murder trial, which was henceforth called the Lahore conspiracy case. Singh was transported to Bostal Jail, Lahore, and the trial began there on the 10th of July 1929. In addition to charging them with the murder of Saunders, Singh and the 27 other prisoners were charged with plotting a conspiracy to murder Scott, and waging a war against the king. Singh, still on hunger strike, had to be carried to the court handcuffed on a stretcher. He had lost 14 pounds, 6.4 kilograms, from his original weight of 133 pounds, 60 kilograms, since beginning the strike. The government was beginning to make concessions but refused to move on the core issue of recognizing the classification of political prisoner. In the eyes of officials, if someone broke the law, then that was a personal act, not a political one, and they were common criminals. By now, the condition of another hunger striker, Jatindra Nath Das, lodged in the same jail, had deteriorated considerably. The jail committee recommended his unconditional release, but the government rejected the suggestion and offered to release him on bail. On the 13th of September 1929, Das died after a 63-day hunger strike. Almost all the nationalist leaders in the country paid tribute to Das's death. Muhammad Alam and Gopi Chand Bhargava resigned from the Punjab Legislative Council in protest, and Nehru moved a successful adjournment motion in the Central Assembly as a censure against the inhumane treatment of the Lahore prisoners. Singh finally heeded a resolution of the Congress Party, and a request by his father, ending his hunger strike on the 5th of October 1929 after 116 days. During this period, Singh's popularity among common Indians extended beyond Punjab. Singh's attention now turned to his trial, where he was to face a Crown prosecution team comprising C.H. Carden Node, Kalandar Ali Khan, Jaya Gopal Lal, and the prosecuting inspector, Bakshi Dinanath. The defense was composed of 8 lawyers. Prem Dutt Verma, the youngest amongst the 27 accused, threw his slipper at Gopal when he turned and became a prosecution witness in court. As a result, the magistrate ordered that all the accused should be handcuffed. Singh and others refused to be handcuffed and were subjected to brutal beating. The revolutionaries refused to attend the court, and Singh wrote a letter to the magistrate citing various reasons for their refusal. The magistrate ordered the trial to proceed without the accused or members of the HSRA. This was a setback for Singh, as he could no longer use the trial as a forum to publicize his views. To speed up the slow trial, the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, declared an emergency on the 1st of May 1930 and introduced an ordinance to set up a special tribunal composed of 3 High Court judges for the case. This decision cut short the normal process of justice, as the only appeal after the tribunal was to the Privy Council located in England. On the 2nd of July 1930, a habeas corpus petition was filed in the High Court challenging the ordinance on the grounds that it was ultra vires and, therefore, illegal. The Viceroy had no powers to shorten the customary process of determining justice. The petition argued that the Defence of India Act 1915 allowed the Viceroy to introduce an ordinance and set up such a tribunal only under conditions of a breakdown of law and order, which, it was claimed in this case, had not occurred. However, the petition was dismissed as being premature. Carden Node presented the government's charges of conducting robberies and the illegal acquisition of arms and ammunition, among others. The evidence of G.T.H. Hamilton Harding, the Lahore Superintendent of Police, shocked the court. He stated that he had filed the first information report against the accused under specific orders from the Chief Secretary to the Governor of Punjab, and that he was unaware of the details of the case. The prosecution depended mainly on the evidence of P.N. Ghosh, Hans Raj Vora, and Jaya Gopal, who had been Singh's associates in the HSRA. On the 10th of July 1930, the tribunal decided to press charges against only 15 of the 18 accused and allowed their petitions to be taken up for hearing the next day. The trial ended on the 30th of September 1930. The 3 accused, whose charges were withdrawn, included Dutt, who had already been given a life sentence in the Assembly bomb case. The ordinance and the tribunal would lapse on the 31st of October 1930, as it had not been passed by the Central Assembly or the British Parliament. On the 7th of October 1930, the tribunal delivered its 300-page judgment based on all the evidence and concluded that the participation of Singh, Sukhdev, and Rajguru in Saunders' murder was proven. They were sentenced to death by hanging. Of the other accused, 3 were acquitted: Ajoy Ghosh, Jatendra Nath Sanyal, and Deyraj. Kundan Lal received 7 years rigorous imprisonment, Prem Dutt received 5 years of the same, and the remaining 7, Kishori Lal, Mahabir Singh, Bijoy Kumar Shine, A. Shiv Verma, Gaya Prasad, Jaya Dev, and Kamalnath Tiwari, were all sentenced to transportation for life. Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev were sentenced to death in the Lahore conspiracy case and ordered to be hanged on the 24th of March 1931. The schedule was moved forward by 11 hours, and the 3 were hanged on the 23rd of March 1931 at 7:30 p.m. in the Lahore jail. It is reported that no magistrate at the time was willing to supervise Singh's hanging as was required by law. The execution was supervised instead by an honorary judge, who also signed the 3 death warrants, as their original warrants had expired. The jail authorities then broke a hole in the rear wall of the jail, removed the bodies, and secretly cremated the 3 men under cover of darkness outside Nda Singhwala village, and then threw the ashes into the Satluj River, about 10 kilometers, 6.2 miles, from Firozpur. Singh's trial has been described by the Supreme Court as contrary to the fundamental doctrine of criminal jurisprudence, because there was no opportunity for the accused to defend themselves. The special tribunal was a departure from the normal procedure adopted for a trial, and its decision could only be appealed to the Privy Council located in Britain. The accused were absent from the court and the judgment was passed ex parte. The ordinance, which was introduced by the Viceroy to form the special tribunal, was never approved by the Central Assembly or the British Parliament, and it eventually lapsed without any legal or constitutional sanctity. There have been suggestions that Gandhi had an opportunity to stop Singh's execution but refrained from doing so. Another theory is that Gandhi actively conspired with the British to have Singh executed. In contrast, Gandhi's supporters argue that he did not have enough influence with the British to stop the execution, much less arrange it, but claim that he did his best to save Singh's life. They also assert that Singh's role in the independence movement was no threat to Gandhi's role as its leader. So he would have no reason to want him dead. Gandhi always maintained that he was a great admirer of Singh's patriotism. He also stated that he was opposed to Singh's execution, and for that matter, capital punishment in general, and proclaimed that he had no power to stop it. Of Singh's execution, Gandhi said, "The government certainly had the right to hang these men. However, there are some rights which do credit to those who possess them only if they are enjoyed in name only." Gandhi also once remarked about capital punishment, "I cannot in all conscience agree to anyone being sent to the gallows. God alone can take life because he alone gives it." Gandhi had managed to have 90,000 political prisoners, who were not members of his Satyagrah movement, released under the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. According to a report in the Indian magazine Frontline, he did plead several times for the commutation of the death sentences of Singh, Rajguru and Sukhdev, including a personal visit on the 19th of March 1931. Singh's ideal was Kartar Singh Sarabha. He regarded Kartar Singh, the founding member of the Ghadar party, as his hero. Bhagat was also inspired by Bhai Parmanand, another founding member of the Ghadar party. Singh was attracted to anarchism and communism. He was an avid reader of the teachings of Mikhail Bakunin and also read Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. In his last testament to young political workers, he declares his ideal as the social reconstruction on new, Marxist basis. Singh did not believe in the Gandhian ideology a circumflex which advocated satyagrah and other forms of non-violent resistance, and felt that such politics would replace one set of exploiters with another. From May to September 1928, Singh published a series of articles on anarchism in Kirti. He was concerned that the public misunderstood the concept of anarchism, writing that the people are scared of the word anarchism. The word anarchism has been abused so much that even in India revolutionaries have been called anarchists to make them unpopular. He clarified that anarchism refers to the absence of a ruler and abolition of the state, not the absence of order. Singh began to question religious ideologies after witnessing the Hindu circumflex Muslim riots that broke out after Gandhi disbanded the non-cooperation movement. He did not understand how members of these two groups, initially united in fighting against the British, could be at each other's throats because of their religious differences. At this point, Singh dropped his religious beliefs, since he believed religion hindered the revolutionaries' struggle for independence, and began studying the works of Bakunin, Lenin, Trotsky, circumflex all atheist revolutionaries. He also took an interest in Soham Swami's book Common Sense. While in prison in 1930 circumflex 31, Bhagat Singh was approached by Randhir Singh, a fellow inmate, and a Sikh leader who would later found the Akhand Kirtani Jata. According to Bhagat Singh's close associate Shiva Verma, who later compiled and edited his writings, Randhir Singh tried to convince Bhagat Singh of the existence of God, and upon failing berated him, "You are giddy with fame and have developed an ego that is standing like a black curtain between you and God." In response, Bhagat Singh wrote an essay entitled, "Why I Am an Atheist," to address the question of whether his atheism was born out of vanity. In the essay, he defended his own beliefs and said that he used to be a firm believer in the Almighty, but could not bring himself to believe the myths and beliefs that others held close to their hearts. He acknowledged the fact that religion made death easier, but also said that unproven philosophy is a sign of human weakness. In the leaflet he threw in the Central Assembly on the 9th of April 1929, he stated, "It is easy to kill individuals, but you cannot kill the ideas." Great empire crumbled, while the ideas survived. While in prison, Singh and two others had written a letter to Lord Irwin, wherein they asked to be treated as prisoners of war and consequently to be executed by firing squad and not by hanging. Prannath Mehta, Singh's friend, visited him in the jail on the 20th of March, 4 days before his execution, with a draft letter for clemency, but he declined to sign it. The youth of India still draw tremendous amount of inspiration from Singh. He was voted the greatest Indian in a poll by the Indian magazine India Today in 2008, ahead of Bose and Gandhi. During the centenary of his birth, a group of intellectuals set up an institution named Bhagat Singh Sansthan to commemorate him and his ideals. The Parliament of India paid tributes and observed silence as a mark of respect in memory of Singh on the 23rd of March 2001 and 2005. In Pakistan, after a long-standing demand by activists from the Bhagat Singh Memorial Foundation of Pakistan, the Shadman Chowk Square in Lahore, where he was hanged, was renamed as Bhagat Singh Chowk. This change was successfully challenged in a Pakistani court. On the 6th of September 2015, the Bhagat Singh Memorial Foundation filed a petition in the Lahore High Court and again demanded the renaming of the chowk to Bhagat Singh Chowk.